Hello, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Care Podcast. I'm Graham, your host, and today we're going to explore the emotional journey of health and social care. I'll be sharing some stories from colleagues that have stuck with me, some of their moments of joy, heartbreak, and learning. My hope is that you'll see yourself in these stories and perhaps feel a little less alone in the challenges and triumphs of this work. But before I do that, I want to invite you to share your stories with me. What moments in your career have made you pause? What has brought you laughter? Or even reduced you to tears? Drop me a message in an email. I'd love to hear them. And who knows, your stories might inspire our next episode. So, starting with the high points, let's look at the emotional roller coaster that comes with working in care. Very few jobs demand as much heart and resilience. One moment, you're uplifted by a breakthrough with residents. The next, you're navigating challenging situations that test your patience and resolve. I discussed these points with staff from different jobs. My first story comes from a care support worker of 10 years called Chris, and this is what he told me. I'll never forget one of my first experiences in this field. I was working with a gentleman named Peter who had advanced dementia. Communication was a challenge. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was usually fragmented. One afternoon, as we were sitting together listening to some old jazz records, he suddenly started singing along, word for word. It was like the music had unlocked something deep within him, a part of his memory that seemed to be untouched by time or illness. I remember sitting there, stunned and emotional, trying to hold back tears as he sang with so much joy. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental to me, he said. It reminded me why I chose this path, to connect and to help people rediscover parts of themselves, even if only for a moment. Chris's story is just incredibly moving and such a beautiful reminder of the profound impact care workers like him can have on someone's life. Peter's response to the music, how it seemed to unlock parts of him untouched by dementia, really speaks to the power of human connection and the ability of music to reach us in ways words sometimes can't. What struck me most is the sense of joy that he described, but not just in Peter, in his own reaction as well. It must have been such an emotional and rewarding moment, especially so early in his career. Experiences like that, they can redefine how we view our work, can't they? They make it clear that care is much more than just meeting physical needs. It's about seeing the whole person, their history, and their humanity. Have you ever had a moment like that, where something you did brought someone back to life, even briefly? It's very humbling, isn't it? Sadly, those highs can often be clouded by the sheer emotional weight of the lows. Chris also spoke with me about the sometimes emotional labour of supporting the families. Sometimes, he went on to say, you're not just caring for the person, but also navigating the frustration, fears, and guilt of their loved ones. I once had a family member shout at me because they were overwhelmed by their parents' decline. He said, I understand where it comes from, but it didn't make it any less draining. Have you experienced this with family members? If so, share it with us. Tell us your tips on how you handled it. This then links towards my next story. It's about the harder parts of this work, and it comes from Jane, a senior care worker in a nursing home. Jane explains, one of the hardest experiences I've had was with a client named Sarah. She was in her late 70s, living with a degenerative condition that left her in constant pain. And despite her situation, she had this wicked sense of humour. She was always cracking jokes, even when you could tell that she was struggling. One day, I walked into her room, and she was quieter than usual. And when I asked her how she was, she looked at me and said, I'm tired. Not just today. I'm tired of it all. These words hit me like a ton of bricks, she said. What do you say in a moment like that? I sat down next to her, held her hand, and just listened. She didn't need any solutions. She needed someone to witness her pain, without judgment. Jane continued to say, later that evening, I cried in my car. Not because I felt helpless, but because I realized how deeply this work impacts us. We carry people's stories, their struggles, and sometimes their heartbreak. It is an honor, but it's also really heavy. And that conversation I had with Jane about such a personal and powerful experience clearly demonstrates that care requires not only professional skill, but also an incredible amount of emotional resilience and empathy. I was stunned by the way she handled the moment with Sarah. She didn't rush to fill the silence or offer empty words. Instead, she gave her space to feel seen and heard, which is such a profound act of kindness. Jane also shared a time with me about dealing with a resident who had suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. I think every one of us has had to say goodbye to someone we cared for at some point, and it's never easy. One particular service user I worked with for years passed away unexpectedly, and I carried that grief with me for weeks. It wasn't just losing a client or a service user. It was losing someone I'd built a relationship with. I asked her, "How do you cope with those moments?" She replied, saying, "For me, I've learned to lean on my team and to talk about it, as bottling it up never works. Sometimes it's about finding small ways to honor those who we've cared for, even if it's just lighting a candle or taking a quiet moment to reflect." One of the most unexpected lessons I've learned within my time in healthcare is that every interaction teaches you something about resilience, kindness, and sometimes even about yourself. This takes me to my next conversation. This was about an unexpected lesson and was with Katie, a hospitality manager in a residential setting. She told me of a friend, an old colleague of hers. He had no family, and his only companion was his old Labrador Daisy. Sadly, when Daisy passed away, he completely shut down. He stopped eating, stopped engaging. It was like he'd lost his will to keep going. I remember sitting with him one afternoon, trying to convince him to have something to eat. He looked at me and just said, "She was the only one who loved me." That really broke my heart. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the team to get him involved in small group activities. It was a very slow progress, but eventually he started talking to others. He then joined a gardening group, which also then became a new passion of his. Seeing him come back to life was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. What Katie said she'd learned from him was that no matter how isolated or lost someone feels, there's always a spark within someone waiting to be reignited. And sometimes all it takes is patience and persistence. Katie's story was both heartbreaking and incredibly uplifting. It highlights so many layers of what it means to truly care for someone. Her friend's journey reminds me how deep the connections between humans and their companions can be, and how devastating it can feel to lose them. What really stood out for me, though, is the compassion and determination Katie and her team showed in helping a friend and colleague find his way back. It's inspiring to hear how something as simple as gardening could reignite his sense of purpose and connection. So why do we stay in this field knowing how hard it can be? For me, it's simple. It's the people. Each story, each life we touch, it leaves an incredible mark on us. Yes, the work is demanding. Yes, it's emotionally taxing. But it's also meaningful in ways very few other professions can claim. We are witnesses to life in its rawest form. The joys, the sorrows, and the triumphs. It can be a tough job. And from navigating funding pressures to handling emotional challenges, I also wanted to explore what makes this work so uniquely demanding, yet so amazingly rewarding. So let's have a look at some of the structural challenges, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. Funding shortages, staff shortages, and increasing demands on the system are constant hurdles. For this, I spoke with Colin. Colin has worked his way through the industry across various homes over the past 20 years and is currently in the position of home care manager. I asked him about the structural challenges and he told me this. "I remember one period where we had to stretch a team of 15 to cover what really needed 20. The paperwork had piled up, the visits felt rushed, and we were constantly juggling priorities. I'll never forget a service user saying to me, "You're my lifeline, but I know I'm just one of many to you." And that stuck with me, he said, because it highlighted the human impact of these shortages. He then went on to explain some funding issues. Every year seems to bring a round of new budget cuts or reallocations. It can feel like we're being asked to do so much more with so much less. I once had a manager tell me, "We're not cutting corners, we're building round corners." That's a clever phrase, he said. But in reality, these cutting resources mean cutting time and care. And that's something none of us want. What makes it harder is that these structural issues aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're moments of frustration. When you can't get someone the equipment they need, or when you have to fight for basic resources. He then went on to say, staying up to date with industry changes, policies, procedures, and training. It's no small task. There's a constant need to balance compassion with professionalism. And that's not easy at all. That's such a good point Chris has made there. The balance between compassion and professionalism is such a delicate one, especially when you're dealing with a constantly evolving sector. However, despite everything, we keep going. Again, why? Because this work matters. I think about the smiles, the breakthroughs, and the small victories. I've had staff also speak with me about the time non-verbal residents began communicating through a communication board after weeks of trying, or the time they got a thank you note from a family member who said, "You made our dad feel human again." It's in these moments that we see the impact of our efforts. Yes, the challenges are immense, but they're part of what makes the rewards so meaningful. The other significant issue in health and social care I'd like to briefly touch on today is staff burnout, a term we hear often but don't always address effectively. Burnout can sneak up on you, especially when you're juggling with long hours, emotional demands, and the pressure to always be switched on. I recently spoke with a resident's family member, Carol, who said something that had stuck with me. She said, "I see how hard the care workers work. Sometimes I wish they'd just stop for a minute and breathe. I know my mum appreciates them, even if she doesn't always say it." It's comments like these that serve as a reminder that while families see your hard work, they also see your exhaustion. Burnout isn't inevitable. By prioritizing self-care, you can sustain your passion for this work whilst protecting your own well-being. Here are some practical tips. Set boundaries. It's easy to let work spill into your personal life, but try to establish clear boundaries. Don't take work home with you. Find your support system. Lean on your colleagues. Sharing your experience with someone who understands can be very therapeutic. If your workplace offers supervision or peer support, take advantage of it. Take your breaks seriously. A quick walk, cup of tea, or even 5 minutes of quiet can help reset your mind on a very busy shift. Prioritize sleep and nutrition. It's basic, but vital. A well-rested and nourished body can handle stress a lot better. Celebrate the small wins. Did a resident smile today because of something you did? Did you finally resolve an issue that's been lingering for ages? Acknowledge these victories. They all matter. Lastly, seek professional support. If the emotional weight feels too heavy, consider speaking with a counsellor or a therapist. Many companies offer employee assistance programs for this purpose. Now, I've shared some incredible stories today, but I know there are so many more out there. I want to hear from you. What's been your most rewarding moment in care work? What challenges have you managed to overcome? Maybe you've got a moment or an experience that keeps you going on the tougher days. Send your stories to the care-podcast.outlook.com or comment on this podcast. I'll feature some of them in upcoming episodes because this is a community and we're here to learn from each other. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, you are not alone in this journey. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, rate and follow so you never miss an update. And please share this podcast with your colleagues and friends within the sector. You can find me on all social media platforms. The links will be in the show notes. Let's spread the word and grow this community together. Take care of yourselves and never underestimate the impact of your work. Until next time, keep doing what you do best, making a difference one person at a time.